And this one is focused on basically reclaiming the Great Commission, the Great Commission that the Lord gave in Matthew 28. So we are basically taking a couple of days of all the priests of the area to really focus on how to basically reach out and plant the Orthodox seed through our community, but maybe in a different way that we're expecting. And I won't give too much away, but basically it is to again we'll let Father Evan do all that. So our guest speaker tonight is going to be Father Evan Armitage, who is a parish priest from the metropolis of Denver. So his parish is about an hour and a half north of Denver, Colorado. And he's accepted our invitation to come and speak to the clergy, and actually even speak to everybody in terms of our evening tonight. Why are we doing this tonight? Because we as priests, we've mentioned many times, we cannot do everything, and we need basically the leadership of this church to basically be on board with the vision, be on board with what the church is trying to do. So that's why you're invited tonight, and that's why we hope that this is going to be maybe actually a different way to look at things, and we invite you to listen, but also to participate at the end with all your questions. We'll try to get through all your questions. All your questions at the end. So Father Evan, just in terms of a very, very brief background, has been a priest, I believe, since 2002. He was in a big church in the Denver area, and God put upon his heart to basically start a mission church. And he went about an hour and a half north of Denver and found 6 families from the Yellow Pages back then. And now, from 2007 to now 2021, namely maybe even 2018, had to expand his church because it is a vibrant, growing, and one that's not only helping the community in Loveland, Colorado, but we found out it's also helping areas in South America and Africa as well. And he's going to basically give a synopsis of what he's giving the priest in the next couple of days. So, Father Evan, we all have the pleasure to hear you this evening. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Father. Oh, that's my slide. Hello. Is this volume okay? I'm not too used to. Pull it away a little bit? Yeah. Is that better? Okay. My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, it's an incredible privilege to be here today. I'm extremely grateful to the fathers for their gracious welcome, this invitation to come to Chicago. As I take part in this gathering, I do as a guest, but I hope that you will welcome me as a brother. I've been asked to speak on the topic of reclaiming the Great Commission, and the subtitle I have given is Strategies for Orthodox Evangelism in a Post-Pandemic World. I feel the time allotted for our discussion is too short. Thus, I've done my best to abbreviate my remarks from a much larger body of work on this topic. Now, the basis of our talk, understanding parish health and leadership, is our life's work. And my thoughts today come from the dozens of presentations I've made on this topic and a course of study that I have taught at Holy Cross Seminary entitled Parish Health and Leadership. I will attempt to give you in this abbreviated presentation a taste of what is usually covered in several months, even a year. Now, to help you get a sense of this topic, let me share an analogy for this field of study. One of my mentors once said to me, understanding and implementing these concepts is like eating a salami. And as you know, you can't eat a salami all at once. But you slice just one piece at a time. So be patient with yourselves. But let me appeal to you tonight to open your hearts and minds, to shut off your phones, and to listen. And may the Holy Spirit, who continues to make up for my deficiencies, enrich our hearts this evening. So part one, the current landscape, internal and external challenges. Let me make for you a case for urgency and change. So my opening question to you this evening is, should we, the faithful and the priests here gathered, be concerned about the state of the church? Is it viable? And will it be here in a meaningful way in just a few decades? To begin answering this question, let me recall an event from our common U.S. history, the Space Shuttle Challenger. In 1985, I began my 10th grade year at Overland High School. And on January 28, 1986, as we started our second semester, the school was brought into the gym for an all-school event. We were there to watch the launch of the space shuttle. If you recall, 73 seconds, the 25th space shuttle mission ended in disaster. After a lengthy and in-depth review, it was determined that a relatively small and inexpensive part caused one of our nation's most costly and deadly space program disasters. The now infamous O-ring. The irony of this tragic event was that the most complex piece of machinery ever developed by human beings up to that point, something that could literally go into the heavens and return back to Earth, was destroyed by something as simple as a plastic gasket. What makes the shuttle disaster all the more tragic is that several top engineers within NASA had sounded the alarm long before the shuttle disintegrated shortly into flight. Urgency. What I have shared about NASA is similar to what is happening today in America. And like NASA, there's only a few of us who have been sounding the alarm, but are we listening? I want to share a universal truth about change, namely that in order for it to occur, individuals and the system they are in our case our parishes, must feel a deep sense of urgency to change. And in order for that to happen, we must all be in touch with the facts as they are. At the same time, as we discussed with the fathers earlier today, we must be aware of our own internal resistance to change, what we sometimes label defensiveness. So I want to pause here and ask you two questions. First, do you have a sense of urgency about the state of affairs within our church? And if you do, are you willing to overcome your own resistance and that within your parishes and beyond to make necessary changes? Now, just about 8 months ago, I was here in Chicago with the metropolis of Chicago. I met with its registrar, its bishop, Metropolitan Nathaniel, and over 70 clergy. And I read to them something from their own internal report about the state of churches. I want you to listen to it. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, in Chicago, there was at one point over 1.1 million Greek Orthodox Christians in the city. It was one of the largest populations of practicing Orthodox Christians in the Western world. Here's where things stand now. The data and trends observed provide the metropolis with a picture of our church, one in which fewer people partake in the sacraments of initiation, like baptism, today than in the past. If we continue on this downward trajectory, it is inevitable that we will have far more empty pews in our parishes. This not only means that our parishes may find themselves unable to support their basic operations and ministries, but more tragically, that there will be fewer Orthodox Christians witnessing to the gospel and sharing the love of Christ in the world. One can surely point out that this downward trend is observed in most major faith communities across the United States. We cannot, however, afford to become complacent in this fact. We must understand the urgency of our reality. Instead of searching for excuses and becoming defensive, we should remain inquisitive. Now, some of us may be aware of the general decline in Christian populations in America. Over the past 10 years, the number of Christians in the U.S. has declined by 12%. However, Orthodoxy in America has fared far worse. In the past decade, the decline of the total number, Greeks, Russians, Bulgarians, and even Copts, is 17% less than it was 10 years ago. Now, I'm well aware of the recent so-called growth of the Coptic Orthodox churches. I label it so-called growth because thus far, most of what I see mirrors the growth seen in the Greek, Russian, and even Antiochian archdioceses of the past. For the Greeks, this growth occurred primarily in ethnic communities out of increased immigration. However, each of these aforementioned archdioceses came to find that this growth trajectory was short-lived. And now successive generations of Orthodox within these jurisdictions have not materialized. Rather, the emphasis on baptizing, marrying, and burying, without the more essential work of evangelizing and health, have resulted in an almost total loss of the gains seen in earlier decades. And as I said, if we tonight, both the priest and laity, don't recognize the facts, then there will be no urgency. Without this sense of urgency, the opportunity for change goes out the window. It evaporates. So as we begin, you have to, if you will, examine your own feelings and your own perhaps tendency to resist, sabotage, become cynical or defensive about the facts as they are. So, part 2. Let me talk to you a bit about disruptive innovation and the rule of the 5%. How can the disruptions that we face and the obstacles that we encounter lead to positive outcomes? So with these statistics, you see the slide again, 12% decline in America, 17% decline in Orthodoxy, and I didn't share with you, in the metropolis of Chicago, it's 25%. I quoted to the fathers earlier, 27. I wanted to make it softer when I presented this to Chicago, so I rounded down. How do we face what we face and somehow come out ahead? So with these sobering statistics in mind, I want to share something encouraging. It has to do with how these changes or disruptions can actually benefit us. Some of you may be aware of the term disruptive innovation theory. Has anybody heard this besides myself? No? Amazon. You ever used it? That's a disruptive innovation. You guys remember Sears? There used to be a big giant building downtown. It's gone, right? How about Kodak? Disruptive innovation leads to change. One of the ways that we can view this is actually called the 5% rule. The 5% rule tells us while some parishes experience disruptions but find themselves innovating and changing for the better. To understand this concept better, we have to start with the following realization. You can write this down. It's important. Disruption or struggle and innovation go hand in hand. So think about the gospel. The gospel was one of the most disrupting forces ever introduced. And what did it lead to? A complete change for humanity. Now, one classic look at this reality studied the commuting patterns of people in London, England. So it found, this study, that during a major strike of the London Tube, around 5% of commuters found a better and shorter way to work due to their normal route being disrupted. Think about that. So you go to work each and every day, and the route that you take is disrupted by a strike. And because of the strike, 5% of us find a better and quicker way to go to work. Now, interestingly, but key to the researchers' findings was the fact that the better route commuters began to use after the strike had been available prior to the strike. You see, due to the fact that systems like our parishes or dioceses, our boards, and even each of us, resist or sabotage change and seek equilibrium or safety over adventure, we remain in our dysfunction. Did you catch that? Systems seek equilibrium. Systems seek safety. People seek safety. People seek equilibrium. And as a result, we don't adventure into new paths. We remain in our dysfunction. We don't take the quicker route to work. The commuters in the study did not, prior to the strike, avail themselves of the better route. This is the key point. Similarly, early findings on the effects that the pandemic is having on church life show that the same rule is playing out. We are finding that roughly 5% of the communities in America are actually doing better today than they were pre-pandemic. Do you find that unusual? Some communities have more membership. Some communities have more dollars. Some communities have more ministry after the disruption of the pandemic. These communities report that the pandemic has led to innovations, changes, and new efficiencies that have improved the overall vitality and life of the community. In a sense, these parishes have become better versions of themselves. But if we peel back these findings a little, one additional tidbit of useful information comes to the fore. Namely that these outlier parishes, these 5%ers, these people who have been disrupted and innovated, they were growing during the pandemic, but also were trending positive prior to the pandemic. While parishes who were experiencing decline have seen their decline speed up. All the pandemic did was it accelerated. If parishes were plateauing or dying, the pandemic accelerated it. If parishes were starting to grow, the pandemic accelerated this. In light of what I've said, this subtitle to my talk is to a degree irrelevant. Strategies for a post-pandemic world. Because one could argue that the pandemic, or not the pathways and opportunities as well as the threats and challenges we face, existed prior and will be there afterward. In fact, one well-respected and well-known church health and growth expert and consultant, Tom Rainer, in his book, Autopsy of a Deceased Church, states that at any given point in time, the following is true. Within the overall parish population, healthy communities only make up 10%. You see the statistic on the screen. While dying parishes make up another 10%. The rest of the 80% is made up of 40% unhealthy and 40% very unhealthy. In that unhealthy and very unhealthy, they're on their way to dying. That's the cycle of growth. Now, trailing indicators, or at least metrics, that help us understand where we currently are attendance and financial support. When people try to measure, how's my parish doing? We have two quantitative measurements. I was sharing with the fathers that often when I'm invited to different places in the U.S. to speak, I'll meet with the local communities, and the community will tell me, Father, we have 800 families, we have 600 families, we have 400 families. And I'll say, oh, amazing. How many people do you have in church on a Sunday? Oh, 150, maybe 200. And so that indication of numbers, and sometimes I'll say to them, well, how many did you have 10 years ago? I say, well, we used to have 300 on a Sunday. That number is an indicator of the overall health of the community. As the number either stays the same or declines, it tells you a little bit about the overall health. The same is true for dollars. Now, this isn't, if you will, telling you much about the qualitative measurements, like what is the level of spirituality in the community, which is a lot harder to measure. But nevertheless, the conclusion we can draw is that if my parish is seeing improvement right now, then we are a 5%er. And if not, we're part of the 95%. Now, I mentioned to you, there's this quantitative measurement, numbers and dollars, and there's this qualitative reality. And while this all might sound bad, let me remind you of the silver lining. If your community currently is not healthy, don't despair. Because the pandemic and other disrupting factors that are now facing you as a community can push you into innovating and becoming one of the 5%ers. Let's turn now, in part 3 here, to some of the specific core disruptors or obstacles that we face. I want you to listen to this story. It's true. You see depicted behind me a U.S. life-saving station. These dot the eastern seaboard. But if you look closely in the photograph, what do you see inside? You see a dining room table. On dangerous seacoasts across the eastern side of the U.S., where shipwrecks often occurred, there was often crude little life-saving stations erected. The building would be just a hut. There would be just one boat and a few devoted members who kept constant watch over the sea. These members had no thought for themselves. They went out day or night, tirelessly searching for those who were being lost. We know from the history of these stations that many lives were saved by these wonderful little life-saving stations so that they became famous. Now, some of those who were saved, some of the sailors and passengers and various others in surrounding areas, in time, wanted to become associated with these stations and give of their time and money and effort for the support of its work. In time, those crude little huts with one boat received new equipment. New boats were bought. New crews were trained. And the little life-saving station grew. As is often the case in these stations, the new members of the life-saving station became unhappy that the building was so crude and so poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided for those first refugees saved from the sea. So you'll see this again and again as you visit these stations. The old cots were replaced with beds. The old crude furniture was thrown out, and the building was enlarged. And now the life-saving station was not solely about saving lives, but became a popular gathering place for its membership. Bars were placed inside the huts. They were redecorated. Beautiful exotic woods were brought in, and the life-saving station became a type of club. Is this sounding familiar? Over time, one by one, the members of these life-saving stations were no longer interested in going out to sea on life-saving missions. They would hire lifeboat crews to do the work. This is true. The mission of life-saving was still given lip service. They'd hang the life buoy in the main room. They'd have pictures of some of the shipwrecks on their walls. But the members were too busy and lack the necessary commitment to take part in these life-saving activities personally. So they would hire help. In one particular area of the eastern seaboard, where one of these stations existed, a large shipwreck occurred. And the hired crews brought in boatloads of these cold, wet, half-drowned people into the nice club. They were dirty, they were sick. This boat was not from the western part of the world, and some of them had black skin. Several of the passengers spoke a strange language. And this one particular beautiful new club was considerably messed up. So you can see in the meeting minutes that the property committee immediately had a shower house built outside the club so that the victims would not be brought in to the life-saving station. They should be cleaned up outside, not come into the building. Splits occurred in many of these life-saving stations, and the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities as being unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal life pattern of the club. But a small group within these life-saving stations often felt and insisted that life-saving was still their primary purpose. They even pointed to the words on the outside of the building, "It is a U.S. life-saving station." But time and again, these remnants, few, were voted down. They were sent down the coast. If they wanted to save the life of all these various kinds of people who were shipwrecked, they could begin their own life-saving station down the coast, and they did. The same story repeats itself. One of my graduate students made a tour of these eastern coast seaboard life-saving stations and verified there are dozens of them. Now, I add to this story, in my own view, if we visit the seacoast today, we find a number of these exclusive clubs along the shore. And while shipwrecks may still occur, most people now drown. Now, I hope that you'll understand that what I'm talking about in this analogy is the church. Right? Let's talk about how we got there. So the slide behind you is titled "The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse." And these four things are titled Unbalanced Identity, Stagnation, Underdevelopment, and Autocracy. So I'd like to take some time to talk to you about how a life-saving station becomes a club. Again, time is limited, so we'll focus on what are the four core disruptors or obstacles to parish health. The first one, unbalanced identity. Now again, this is a very condensed set of notes from a one-year-long graduate course. So you are advanced PhD students because you're getting something that would normally take us a year to discuss. But we're condensing it, okay? Unbalanced identity. This is one of the obstacles that faces us in our parishes. And, to sort of give you a little tangent, the fathers and I spent the afternoon talking about the concept of parish health, okay? So we can think about parish health like we would think about our own personal health, okay? And in other words, if we want to be healthy, we have to change our lifestyle, right? And if you say, boy, I'd really love to be able to run a marathon, but you spend most days smoking cigarettes and eating donuts, how likely is that to occur? It's not going to happen. So these obstacles are like the cigarettes and the donuts. In order for us to become a healthy parish, we first have to remove the unhealthy habits. It doesn't do us much good to lift weights and jog if every meal is ice cream, cigarettes, and alcohol, right? You following my analogy? So the first of these, as I say to you, is unbalanced identity. So let's talk about what this is. Unbalanced identity occurs when we lose sight of our true identity, like in the story I just read you. The life-saving station loses sight of its identity and becomes what? A country club. In such a state, we, the faithful, become fixated on certain elements or specifics of our identity. For example, in my world, it's Greek culture. So we have Greek dance groups and Greek language schools. We become fascinated with our sports teams within the parish. And these specifics are limited in vision and mission. Now, tragically, we then, as the story again illustrates, elevate, honor, and guard these specifics. They become sacred to us. And the non-essential becomes our mission. What was essential to the life-saving station? That it saved shipwrecked sailors and passengers. That was essential. That gets replaced by something periphery, a club, where we can have drinks with our friends. We then, as a community, focus more and more of our time and resources on these non-essentials. We become adamant about defending and promoting them. And again, as I said to you, what's sacred for many Greek Orthodox parishes is the Holy Trinity of Greek dance, Greek school, and Greek festivals. Ask anyone in Chicago, do you know St. Haralambos? Oh, they throw the best food festival in July, right? The second obstacle to growth, stagnation. The second core disruptor or barrier is a disfigured and inward focus that is self-absorbed and self-serving. Listen to this. Its hallmarks are a lack of demographic and idea diversity. If you attend some parishes within the Greek Archdiocese, you'll not only find Greeks, but you'll find Greeks from a specific village. I learned from the fathers that the same is true in the Coptic world, right? These Copts are from Alexandria. Am I getting that right? These Copts are from the south. These Copts are from Cairo, right? And God forbid if someone with blonde hair and blue-eyed walked in. I shared the story with the fathers that when I first went to start this brand new community in northern Colorado, I came back to our cathedral in Denver, and I ran into one of the old ladies in the parish who knew me since I was a child, and she said to me in her broken English, "Father, I never see you anymore in so many years. Where are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm up in northern Colorado, in Loveland." Loveland. A lot of Greeks there, a lot of Greeks. I said, "No, there's not any Greeks up there." "You have the liturgy there? No Greeks? You have a liturgy?" I said, "Yeah, we serve the liturgy all the time." She said, "Does the bishop know?" I said, "Yeah, the bishop knows." "You should tell him to close it down." Right? Now, it's funny, but are we much different? If this community, if one of your communities was full of non-Copts, non-Egyptians, would that be okay? So in stagnation, we lack demographic and idea diversity. And the focus of the leadership in our parish is on the interests of a few. I once had to oversee a bake sale meeting with our women's auxiliary, and I told the fathers this, where the argument was what type of cookies we would bake. And the minority position of Greeks was only Greek cookies could be sold at the bake sale, because this was a Greek parish. In such a state, the ministries, the offerings of the parish are designed for internal consumption. And parish life is centered around social gatherings, events, and dinners. So at the largest parish on the West Coast in Oakland, the Greek Orthodox parish in Oakland, it's a cathedral, 2,200 families. My friend Father Michael used to basically give me a sense of how bad his week was by how many chicken dinners he had to attend. I say, Father Michael, how was this week? 5 chicken dinners. He'd go to these social events, right? And then the next week, how was that week? 3 chicken dinners. We design everything for internal consumption. It's all about social gatherings and dinners and fundraisers for ourselves. Even worship is specialized. It's inaccessible to the outsider, designed to serve our people and serve their needs. Sadly, this parish I'm describing, neither resembles the community around it or impacts it in a meaningful way. This is an easy and important question. If your parish vanished tomorrow, who would notice? Think about it. If it went away, besides your own members, would anybody notice? In the parish that's stagnating, no one does. In fact, we'd rather close the church than open the doors. The third factor that often hinders our parishes is what I title underdevelopment. Our third disruptor is found in the fact that elements in the parish life remain underdeveloped. Whether that is our youth program, our outreach ministries, etc. And the number one reason for this poor reality is unhealthy leadership. Because leadership is stunted and disfigured, a whole host of problems arise. Our communities persist in their commitments to specifics and non-essentials. We have poorly defined organizational and administrative structure, which results in confusion over roles and responsibilities. We struggle to make impactful decisions or execute plans and implement meaningful ideas. I can tell you, if I pull back the veil from our discussions earlier today, that many of our fathers exist in a state of uncertainty and even fear. They worry that if they are to step forward and truly lead their communities in a developed way, the people will react. Instead of doing something meaningful, we opt for control. We don't develop a vision for how we're going to serve the world. And instead we rely on rules and regulations and tasks and not the gospel. We get things wrong because we're technically incompetent or lazy, and we lose the trust of those we lead. So many of our parishes are filled with talented people. But because we provide no vision for them, they sit on the sidelines. And when we do this, we sometimes confuse management for leadership or misunderstand both. And time and again, we waste precious time and resources on non-essential tasks. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Again, this is very condensed, but I shared with the fathers a story of giving a presentation in the Pittsburgh metropolis. And one of the priests that was at the presentation, when I got to this section in the presentation, asked me about whether or not my parish was following the uniform parish regulations of the Greek Archdiocese of America and had established a Greek school. And I told him, no, we don't have a Greek school. And he said, but it's in the regulations, you're required to do it. And I said to him, and I said this to the fathers earlier, well, let me ask you a question. You obviously have a Greek school. How many spoons do you have in your drawer? And he didn't understand the analogy. I said, well, when I open my drawer, I have a limited number of spoons. I don't have an unlimited set of spoons. So how many spoons do you have in your drawer? We settled on the number 10. And I said, how many spoons does it take for you to run a Greek school? And he said, well, it's a pretty big Greek school. It probably takes me 3 to 4 spoons. And I said, do you have a Greek festival? He said, we have a massive one. How many spoons does it take to run that? He said, probably another 4. Right? Then they have a Greek basketball program. A couple more spoons. So how many spoons are left? 2? Right? When we're undeveloped as a parish, then we waste our precious resources on non-essential tasks. We constantly elevate the urgent over the important. And because our leadership, that's us, I mean, who else is going to lead the church, is underdeveloped, we don't address the challenges that exist off the map. Instead, we look for quick fixes and address things that are challenges as technical rather than adaptive. I know this language is confusing. It's probably language you haven't heard. I introduced some of the fathers to it just this morning, or just this afternoon. I'll give you a way to understand what I'm talking about. Do you think 300 years ago, anyone in Egypt could have imagined this church? No, it wouldn't have been even 100 years ago. You knew of America, but were there Coptic Orthodox parishes in America? No. So how old is this parish? Huh?
This one?
Yeah.
Like this
This parish.
20 years.
20 years old. Okay, it's 20 years old. Okay? This is a new thing. Right? And yet, is this new thing really engaging the broader community in Chicago? Or is it simply serving its own population? Don't answer the question. Just think about it. I'm not saying serving the native Coptic Orthodox population isn't important, but is that your mission? Your mission alone? Don't you have a broader mission? Remember the title, Reclaiming the Great Commission. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 28, go forth and baptize all nations in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, right? So when we're simply fixated on who is in our four walls, we're not addressing the greater mission of the church. We've replaced the essential with the specific. And the example I gave to the fathers was when Thomas Jefferson hired two explorers, Lewis and Clark, to go west and find the passage, the Northwest Passage, from the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean. Why did he hire them? Fathers, you can cheat. Why did he hire them? Because they were rivermen. They were men who understood how to navigate a river. And the Missouri's close by, right? You know the Missouri River's close by, right? And they figured that the Missouri River, if they traced it to its headwaters, they would then find another river that would take them to the Pacific Ocean. So Thomas Jefferson hired the Corps of Discovery, and he hired two rivermen. And so these rivermen got into their canoes and longboats, and they went up the Missouri River, and what did they find? The Rocky Mountains. No river. So they had to learn how to scale mountains. They had to pick up their canoes and go and do something they'd never done before. If we remain undeveloped, then we cannot go into this uncharted territory. We only stay on the shore. I'll give you a gospel passage to help you understand this. Do you remember when Peter is out fishing all night and he catches nothing? And he's in the shore line. And Jesus tells him what? Go out into the deep. Now, how many of you have swam in the ocean and seen the shelf drop? It's safe to be on the shore. But if you start to swim out to the deep, all of a sudden you can't see the bottom, and it's a little scary, right? But where did Peter catch his fish? In the deep. Our next barrier is autocracy. In the autocratic parish, you see Stalin? In the autocratic parish, power and decision-making is not shared. We exist as pyramids. I know that's very, you like that, right? We like that, okay. We exist, watch my language, that's a dirty, we exist as pyramids, not circles. So one of the ways that this might look is, I don't know if it's true in the Coptic world, but I think it's probably true, we have those who feel entitled to lead the parish. Maybe those key families. And the parish operates like a chapel meeting their needs. You following me? And so decision-making is not shared. That's why it's a pyramid. I'm careful here. But we need circles. Because in a circle, we collaborate and listen. You see this icon of the mystical supper, and you notice the arch, right? It's very common in this icon to always have a curved arch above it. Have you noticed that? In the Byzantine style, even the table is curved. Why? Because the circle engages the faithful. We sit around the Lord's table. It's not something we simply observe. In the autocratic parish, we don't collaborate, we don't cooperate. These are what we call daddy or chapel-run parishes, not empowered or engaged. Now earlier, Father, where's Father? Mina. You asked me this question about how to lead my parish, which is 25 people or less. And I said, you're going to have to be a daddy parish. There's actually a lot of research about what daddy and chapel parishes look like. Churches that are 50 people or less are typically run by a single charismatic daddy, the parish priest. But once they're over 50 people, they have to evolve into something called empowered and engaged. They must involve all people in the parish. Now, daddy parishes never get out from under the single and charismatic or authoritative leader who oversees all things. And chapel parishes never get out of the select group of insiders. In these communities, key parishioners and stakeholders treat the priest as an employee. Fathers, have you ever felt that way? You're a servant who attends to their meetings and their specific needs. And in such a reality, in these daddy and chapel parishes, we have to ask permission to do anything. Our people become consumers of sacred things and not owners. One of the simple ways that I evaluate this when I'm sent out to evaluate parishes is I look at the coat closet. Does this sound weird? Does anybody remember the band Van Halen? I know that's an odd question to ask in a Coptic Orthodox church. Do you remember the band Van Halen? Some of you? They were very popular in the 80s. And one of the things that they had in their contract was that in the dressing room, I can't remember the color, but there had to be only like green M&Ms. And they were asked at one point, what's with this thing that you have in your contract? And they said, well, our stage show is very elaborate. And it requires a lot of technical competency. And we know if in the dressing room we find green M&Ms that they've really paid attention to all the details. Okay? Well, in our parishes, when I go to them and I find the coat closet, it's usually out in the front, and it's got old boxes and it's dirty and it's not cleaned out. Does this sound familiar? Or there's dead plants in the hallway. I know that the laity is not engaged. They're waiting for someone they've hired, the janitor or the priest, to clean it up. Remember in the life-saving station? What's the stage before they end up just kicking everybody out? They hire somebody to do the life-saving work. They're no longer empowered or engaged themselves. They're consumers, not owners. I've gone to parishes where as I walk up to the front door, there's trash, and as I'm going in to do the presentation, parishioners are walking by the trash and not picking it up. And I watch. In fact, I give a whole presentation on whether or not you're a weed picker. In other words, if you show up at your parish in the summertime and there's weeds growing, do you pick them? Or do you wait for the landscaping company? You see, that's a small version of the fact that in our church schools, the same thing's happening. Right? On our boards, in worship. Everything's by proxy. That's what happens when autocracy has taken over the life of the parish. All right, so we've got to talk about a way out. we've got to talk about how we become a 5%er. This is Parish Health. So this is something that the fathers are a little bit familiar with. You guys on the slides showing right? Okay. So having become familiar to a degree with the obstacles and barriers that exist, we can recall that 5% rule once again. Remember, disruption and innovation go hand in hand. So if we can agree that a quick fix is not possible, then what are we to do? The growing evidence around parish renewal and strength points to something called parish health. But what is it exactly? Parish health is not a pill. It's not a list of best practices. Instead, parish health is a culture shift and a lifestyle change. It's more like exercise and a diet. And so we should understand that this is a transition and a transformation that we undergo. I said to the fathers, it's slow. It's incremental. If done right, it takes about 7 years. Now, how many of us here are willing to commit to a process that takes 7 years? Whether you're Egyptian, you're now American. How long should it take for you to get your dinner? Well, you drive through and get it, right? You can get it right away. And if you're an Amazon Prime member, how long should you have to wait for your product to arrive? 2 days is a long time, isn't it now? We want to see it same day delivery, right? But rather, parish health is a process that takes time. So what is it? You'll see that I've listed 4 bullets behind me, and this is the definition of parish health. First, developing a personal commitment to Christ and the gospel. This is orthodoxy. We say in the Byzantine Rite liturgy, and I'm not sure if this is, the fathers can tell me the following phrase. We say it several times. Let us commit ourselves and one another and our whole lives to Christ our God. Do you have a petition like this? You can't think of one. But it's implied, isn't it? That we are committing ourselves to Christ by being in the church. Now, in such a setting, we see that the spiritual needs of those in our communities are not only met but exceeded by the sufficiency of Jesus. Number 2 is ensuring that our personal commitment to Christ and the gospel impacts us daily. This is orthopraxia. You know, one of the fathers lamented that sometimes he wonders if the faith is actually showing up in the day-to-day living of his faithful. So you do the wedding, the person's there praying, you go to the reception, and they're drinking. Does the faith impact us in our daily lives? A healthy parish makes sure that this is happening. It insists, if you will. Does what Jesus did and said and teach impact our lives in a transformational way? I love this phrase of Jesus from Luke chapter 6. He says, "Why do you call me Lord and not do what I tell you?" You know, we're very busy calling Jesus Lord all the time in the church. And then we walk out of the church with communion on our lips and we judge our neighbors. We ask, what's the score of the Bears game? Right? We lose sight of the gospel impacting our lives. Number 3 is have we become a spiritual family? Relationships and community, right? A healthy parish develops bonds, fellowship, community, and the interconnected social interactions of a family that cares for one another and its neighbors. And the last one is pursuing and developing excellence in leadership. We can only come to this place of health if we have a firm and abiding commitment to leadership training and development. That means for us personally. And the clarity of identity that comes by way of thoughtful and continued planning. So parish health is found in the excellence of our day-to-day management and operation of the fundamentals. Okay? Part 5. The road before us. So how critical then is it for healthy leadership in our parishes, starting with us, to be out front facing those disruptions I mentioned, and I mentioned 4, those obstacles, and leading us towards health? This is how we become a 5%er. So as we close these brief remarks together, let me spend my last minutes with you making the case for developing yourselves as leaders and leaders in your parish. Now, how is this done? You know, a leader recognizes that the landscape has changed. You're not in Egypt anymore. Right? You guys clear? There's a famous, we're not in Kansas anymore. You remember from The Wizard of Oz? You're not in Egypt. No pyramids. You also notice that there needs to be a sense of urgency in your community because things are not okay. So you stay in touch with the facts. Have you ever noticed that when you're on the highway and speeding, this minute you see a cop, you go the speed limit? Right? And so a lot of times our hierarchs, our bishops, when they visit our parishes, the parishes are full. Right? Everybody's come out to see the bishop. So the bishop, everywhere he goes, it's the halo effect. He thinks all is well. Right? It's sort of like in the Greek tradition, we have Pascha, and the following Sunday is a Sunday of Thomas. And no one's in church. Pascha, full. Thomas Sunday, nobody. Which is the reality? Most Sundays look like Thomas, not like Pascha, right? So healthy leadership is in touch with the facts. It's not living in a fantasy. It's developed a sense of urgency. It's looking at the obstacles. Then the leader actively and constantly assesses what forces are existing that are disfiguring our parish's identity and culture. And then he explains this to his community. We talked about the Father's reticence sometimes to share the facts as they are. But we, the faithful, have to be willing to hear the truth. One of the reasons we ordain clergy is that they will fulfill the prophetic office of Christ. They're supposed to be prophets for you. So we must allow them to tell us where we're going wrong. Leaders set their sights in the communities on discovering and journeying toward the true vision of their parish's identity and culture. They're not afraid of the adventure. They're not afraid of picking up their canoes and walking over the Rocky Mountains. And so then they lead the learning, and they change the parish by pruning the obstacles. We don't like to lose members, do we? But sometimes people have to be lost in order to be saved. Right? St. John of the Ladder. Do you have St. John of the Ladder, right? He wrote his incredible work, The Ladder of Divine Ascent. Do you know what he says in that book? He says a lot of things. He talks about the two conditions for Christian growth. He says they are either ascent or descent, but not side to side. He says it's better to fall than to move to your right or to your left. Because when we fall, we can get up. If we're just going laterally, status quo, we die. Right? Sometimes they say Christians have to be like sharks. You know that sharks don't have articulated gills? So if a shark, you know how you kill a shark? You simply stop it from moving. Because he can't breathe. He'll suffocate. That's why sharks eerily go around with their mouths open. Because as they move forward, even when they sleep, water rushes over their gills and they can oxygenate their blood. Christians have to be on the move, right? Think about how the whole story of faith begins. What does God say to Abram? Get up and go. Doesn't tell him where yet. He's just to a land I'm going to show you. What if Abraham had just stayed put? That's it. End of story, right? Same is true for us. We lead the learning. We make the changes and prune the obstacles, which leads to greater and greater parish health. This should say part 5. It says part 6. There's a typo. The key to renewal is definitely leadership. We said it already, but we have to return to the biggest driver in the transformation and renewal of our parishes, namely developing leaders. And so I'm going to close by offering a definition for what it means to be a developed leader, and then talk a little bit about the characteristics of one. You see behind me the icon of the three great hierarchs, Basil, John, and Gregory. Now, you may not really think about this, because these are bishops and saints of our church. But do you know in their day, they were the most accomplished academics in the known world? They were the most talented men of their generation. They had spent decades preparing themselves to lead the church. Did you know that? I mean, these are the Einsteins, the Salks, the Louis Pasteurs, the most accomplished men of their generation. Perhaps maybe the most accomplished men of any generation. So I think the icon of them is helpful when we think about defining developing leadership. First, a developed leader is differentiated and emotionally intelligent. Have you thought much about the EQ and not the IQ of a person? What's an IQ? What's the Q for? Quotient, right? What's EQ? Emotional quotient. Do you know that the Harvard Business Review recently published an article that said, forget IQ, focus on EQ? In the church, we look at that as our life in Christ. How many of us would like to follow a leader who's not very mature, spiritually speaking? No one raised their hand, right? But if we have this differentiated, emotionally intelligent leader, this allows us to have leaders that think deeply about their role and what needs to be done. They're not just reactive. Second, these leaders understand the importance of establishing the general character, direction, attitude, and tone of the parish. I told the fathers earlier that one of the problems that most priests fall into is that they get busy doing tasks. They start digging ditches, right? A ditch needs to be dug, so they start digging. Father, we don't have a youth program, so they start digging. And they dig deep, and they dig wide, and they keep digging. And no one ever comes by and says, Father, get out of the ditch. And if the father gets out of the ditch, someone might say to him, Father, where are you digging to? And he'll say, I don't know. Someone handed me a shovel. Right? And we do this all the time. We don't think about the general character, direction, attitude, and tone of the parish. We're too busy marrying, burying. Right? Triage. But a developed leader guides the cascading stream that comes after setting the vision. And here's a simple stream of what I mean. He's established a vision, or she has established a vision, because our leaders are not just men, they're women as well. What's the name of this parish? This is Michael. And then the other one? St. Mary. I learned today that you have 7 feasts of Mary and a monthly feast on November 21st. And how many parishes are named St. Mary? Most, right? So these leaders, they establish the vision, the mission. They establish the long-range strategic goals and the SMART goals. We don't have time to go into all of that. They develop a plan of execution. They establish a cadence and rhythm of the work of the parish, its structure, its organization, its roles and responsibilities. And they get the right people on the bus in the right seats. Have you ever heard that joke? Heaven is having an Italian chef and a German mechanic. Hell is having a German chef and an Italian mechanic. Right? So when we're thinking about leadership in a parish, we guard who gets on the bus in terms of leadership, and we put them in the right seats. Right? Not everybody drives the bus. Not everybody is the mechanic. We get the right people in the right spots, the right roles and responsibilities. And we develop their tools and the processes needed to do their work. All the while, a developing leader understands their own strengths and weaknesses and builds and attracts a cadre of people that share and help congruency and ownership of the vision and the mission. A healthy parish develops bonds and fellowship and community, right? And it's a little bit like a garden with lots of flowers in it. You know, we seed it, we establish its varieties, and then there's constant attention. This plant needs more water. This needs more sun. This one likes to be fertilized often. This one likes it dry. We till and weed, and we care for this garden. That's what good leadership does. And ultimately, these leaders are agents of change. You know, which means that they don't just manage their parishes, leaving them as they are, but they step out of the ditch and they look what needs to be done. I shared another story with the fathers earlier about Captain Winters. He was the captain of Easy Company in World War II. If you've ever read Band of Brothers, there's a moment after D-Day in which Captain Winters is entering into a French village with his company of soldiers, and they come under heavy gunfire, sniper and machine gun fire, and all of the company jumps into the ditches on the side of the road. And Captain Winters knows the objective of the mission, and he tells those in the ditches, you've got to get out of the ditch. If you don't get out of the ditch, you're going to die. Now, he does this while standing in the middle of the road while bullets are whizzing by. And he knows that if we stay in the ditches, we'll all die. He knows that if we get on the road, we'll take the village, and some of us will die. Right? So a developed leader knows that change will cost us something. But he's able to step out of his current state of fear and above and away from the anxious system he's leading and steer the community towards safety. Now, characteristics are numerous, and we'll go through these very quickly. They're listed up there. They have courage, right? Remember Joseph of Arimathea? What does it say he did to go ask for the body? Took courage. The Greek is very interesting again. It says tharsite, which means that he was taking courage. In other words, he never stopped. He had courage when he thought of it. He had courage on the way to Pilate. He had courage before Pilate. He had courage once he received the body. He never lacked courage. And one of the main characteristics of a leader is courage. They don't operate in fear. The next one is character, but above all, integrity. Do you want to know the definition for integrity? I'm going to give it to you right now. It's a fancy word, but I don't think we often understand its specifics. Integrity, or character, is knowing the difference between right and wrong. That's where it starts. You following me so far? Does that sound right? But that's not enough. A lot of criminals know the difference between right and wrong. But they have to do what is right despite the risk it poses to themselves. That's where most of us fail. Most of us leaders know the right thing to do, but we don't want to do it because it poses a risk to us. But a developed leader's characteristic is that he goes beyond the fear of what that action will cause. And then thirdly, what's integrity? It's teaching other people to do the same thing. To distinguish right from wrong, to act for the right despite the risk, and then to teach that to others. You know, I have 4 children. That's what I'm trying to instill in them. I want them to know what is right, what is true, what is holy. And then when they go to school, I want them to live what is right, true, and holy, despite the fact that they might be ostracized. Third, I want them to teach their friends to do the same. The other thing that's characteristic is that the leader has internalized his learnings. You know, the icon behind me is the icon of the Good Samaritan, right? And the passage tells us that when the Samaritan saw the man beaten and left for dead, he had compassion. The original Greek is esplachnithise. It's a cool word. Esplachnithise. What does it mean? It means that the innards of the man turned when he saw the pain of his brother. He saw the person's flesh as their flesh. He internalizes the reality that we're living. The first time that I ever felt that was when my daughter, as a young child, fell off the bed and landed on her head and her neck twisted. And I thought she'd broken her neck. I saw it happen. Slow-mo. You know how that is with parents? And my guts turned. Christ is asking us to have that same feeling as leaders for all that we encounter, right? We mentioned already EQ, emotional intelligence, right? They differentiate themselves from others. They stay appropriately connected emotionally. They know what their core values are. They don't get anxious or reactive. Characteristic of a developing leader is that he develops other leaders and he invests in them. He's not the sole leader. Christ had 12 disciples. He could have done it on his own. And then he had the 70, right? The other thing is that they trust others and listen carefully. Christ wanted to know, when Protestants say to us, why is it that you ask the saints to intercede? Well, the answer has to be, look, we don't need the saints to intercede, correct? Christ can do what Christ wants to do without the saints interceding. But Christ has chosen to listen to them, right? Well, if we're leading communities, do we listen? Do we trust others? As developed leaders, do we think and reflect before acting? Sometimes as a local vicar from my metropolis, one of the fathers will call me, or one of the parish council presidents will call me, they'll tell me what they did, and I'll say, why'd you do that? I say, I don't know. I just reacted, right? Didn't think. And then, of course, we need to be nimble and humble. We can't stay fixed in our position. And, of course, we can't operate in pride. And so we seek out and welcome outside help. Now, one of the things that I said to the fathers earlier is that, of course, we must have a view of not only systemic, but sustained development. Those are 3 resources that you can utilize if you are interested in further learning. But one of the ways that I would put it to you is that if we're going to have healthy parishes, then we have to be engaged in a process of transforming them over a period of time. We can't just do it once and be done. So has anybody ever seen someone put an ink pen on a linen napkin? It was an object lesson I once saw. So there's that fine point of an ink pen. And if you place it on the linen napkin and hold it there, what happens? It starts to slowly leak and diffuse out. And the longer you hold it, that single point, the more the ink spreads. If we remove it, it stops. In a similar way, we have to hold systemically and in a sustained way the development of our parishes in a healthy manner if we hope to see any results. You can't just invite someone like myself in, talk about this for a weekend, and forget it next week. Nothing will change. In fact, one of the quotes from one of the leading authors on church health is the following. The challenge in front of church leaders today is the long tutorial of trial and error, of observing and interpreting and experimenting, which requires us to be changed and attentive to our own resistance to change and to eventually embody the transformation needed and to invite others to join us in it. As I said, this is a very condensed, abbreviated, and quick look at a topic that can take you years of study. I'm going to conclude my remarks here because I fear going any further would just really start to confuse you, and open it up to any kind of questions or comments that any of you may have or any of our participants online may have. Maybe we can get a mic back to the... He's in the back there.
So I'm the leader of the young adult ministry at my church, and it's kind of a new thing. You talked about building a spiritual community, that kind of thing, and I'm worried, these are new people coming in, they're being charismated, baptized, whatever the situation, but I'm concerned for their, retention. how do I, it's not up to me, myself, but, how do we have new people coming in, it's a beautiful thing. How do we build that spiritual community and make it a sustaining thing like you talked about, as opposed to just like, there's people who come and they just stop coming, you never see them again.
Yeah. So the question, if you couldn't hear it, was, in a community where we are seeing newcomers and some growth, how do we sustain that over the long term, right? And not lose them perhaps after a short period of time? Well, the first thing that I would say to you is, if we go back in the presentation to this first obstacle, what's the first problem with an unbalanced identity? True identity is lost. When we look at the mixture of hospitality, bringing people in, and the tension that causes in our communities, that tension often leads us to leave the essential and focus on specifics. So we're leading a young adult group, and at first, we're just interested in attracting people to the faith and to the gospel. But over time, the Christmas party becomes pretty important. And at that Christmas party, people tend to get a little out of hand. And there's a white elephant that becomes maybe a little racy or raunchy, and we allow it. Following me? Like the life-saving station, we start to drift from the main thing. And the main thing is no longer the main thing. And a developed leader notices, he's always scanning. Do you remember cyborgs? It's an old sci-fi. What was Battlestar Galactica? Was another. And the cyborg is always scanning the environment, right? He's reading it. And leaders should be like that. We're always looking at the landscape and going, where are we? What's going on? They always are clear about their identity, and they lead the learning that returns the community out of the specifics into the essentials, right? So when I go to, parishes across the U.S. and I encounter them, and they tell me, Father, we've stagnated and died, and I can be in a church that's 3 times this size, and they'll say, on Sundays we get 60 people. Why? And I say to them, well, God clearly wants your church to grow, and it's not growing. Why? It's usually one of these barriers, and it usually starts with a lost parish identity. We no longer know who we are. Now, why would people come to a Coptic Orthodox church? Why? There's only one reason. You're having a hard time telling me. Why? Jesus! That's the only reason to come here. Not for your, what was that beautiful meat dish?
Hawashi.
Yeah, that's not why they're coming. Hawashi. Shawashi. That's not why. It's not for the nice hats. I like the hats. It's not for the beautiful iconography. There's only one reason, for Jesus, right? Now, if they come here for Jesus and then we don't show them how that should impact their daily lives, we're not going to retain them. And then if showing them how to live day to day, they don't then become incorporated into a living community that's committed to Christ, committed to daily change, they're not going to stay. We are bad event planners. When I took over the youth camp for my metropolis, we would get maybe 40 kids. And we were trying everything. We had the jumpy house, we had rope zip lines. I threw it all out. And I said, we're going to do one thing. We're going to preach Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Within a few short years, we were selling out. And we still didn't have the zip line and the bouncy house. All we have is Jesus, right? So why are people coming? That's the only reason. And sometimes we get in our own way. The main thing is not the main thing. I can't give you any other answer, Am I right? Yeah, I'm right. I know I'm right. Not because I say it's right, but that is what our whole faith is about, right? Other questions? Yes, Mina, and then Father Pavlos. he got to ask me questions all afternoon. No, I'm just kidding. Mina.
Thank you so much, Father Evans. It's been very eye-opening, and I think you're able to put some good verbiage and words on issues that we're all seeing.
Yeah.
My question is with regards to the disruptive innovation. Earlier. Can you go maybe over
Disruptive innovation?
Yes. Some of, some practical examples of things that you have seen that would cause something like this or able to capitalize on it.
So Mina is asking about innovation, disruptive innovation theory, and some practical examples. Okay, give you a simple one. This parish in Chicago. Is that a disruption? I mean, I think it is. Like I said, was it something you could have envisioned 100 years ago? No, I couldn't have. I'll give you another disruption. People who come from Egypt, get married in America, and have babies. Are those babies Egyptian? Not really. I'm the son of immigrants. I didn't want to be known as a Greek kid. My name's Evangelos. Do you think I ever went by that? If I said that in my grade school in Aurora, Colorado, someone would have beat me up. We didn't live in the nicest area, so what was my name? Evan. Right? My favorite team was the Denver Broncos. It wasn't Olympiakos, the Greek soccer team in Athens. Right? Although my grandfather really tried. Right? Is that a disruption? Yeah, it's a disruption because, in our communities, is it true already that you have Coptic Orthodox who were born in the U.S. and they come to church every Sunday? You're one, huh? Yeah. What do you identify as?
That is a great question.
Right, you'll say, I'm Egyptian American. Do you say that?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it depends which side's more, when you're home, you're more Egyptian, and when you're at school, you're more American, right? I lived in that weird world.
But you're like too American for the Egyptians, too Egyptian for the Americans.
Yep. Yeah, I would bring my friends to the house, and they'd say, who died? Because, my aunts and uncles would all be there. I said, nobody, it's just Wednesday. And then I would put food in front of them, and they go, what's this? Moussaka. What's this? Feta. What's this? Halva. Right? They didn't know what any of the foods were. And then they'd look at me and I'd say, just eat it. You'll be okay. You'll live. You'll like it. Ooh, it tastes funny. Nah, it's okay. Now everybody thinks it's exotic and good, right? So the reality is that's disruption, right? Okay, what's another disruption that you can think of that's forcing you as a community to innovate? The internet. What's the number one source for young people to get information? TikTok. It is. Do we have a presence on it? Barely. But that's where young people go. It used to be Facebook. Ask someone under the age of 15 if they have a Facebook page. Not one of them. They might have Instagram. Okay, so what are you going to do? Make fun of it? Laugh it off? Or face the reality? The internet has changed the way we do business. What do you guys have up here? Screen. Why do you have what am I wearing? A mic. You got electric lighting. Right? So innovation forces us, disruptions force us to change. Right? And they're all around us if we look. So when I got to Loveland, there were no Greeks, right? And when I showed up, we had these 6 families, and they'd put some money together, and we got a building. And before I arrived, they purchased a banner. Now, if you know anything about Greeks, what color was the banner? Blue and white, baby. Had the Greek key, right? And it said Greek Church. It was like, letters were like 4 feet high, 10 feet wide, and they plastered it on the front of the building. And then when you went into the small hall, they had Greek flags and the little Greek dancers and the fustanellas. And I walked up to the front of the church, and I immediately looked for a ladder. And I took the sign down. And people freaked out, right? Why did I take the sign down? Huh? Didn't say anything about Jesus, but I joked with the fathers earlier, down the street is a Korean Presbyterian church. How many of you have gone to the Korean Presbyterian church? Why? For Koreans. Well, why would you go to the Coptic Orthodox church? It's for Copts, whoever they are. Right? Who in America knows what a Copt is? They might think, well, did he say cop? What's a Copt? Is it past tense cop? You see, we get so focused on the specifics, we don't let the disruptions of being in America lead us to innovation. But if we start to survey our surroundings, we see sort of disruptions all over the place, right? So I took down the sign, and then I walked into the church. Now, I don't see the similar thing here, but what we have in Byzantine Rite churches, as soon as you walk in, there's a candle stand, right, in the narthex. And the faithful are supposed to go in, they light a candle, and they go into the church. Well, in most Greek parishes, the stand is pushed out, and some old Greek guy stands behind it like this. And he watches whether or not you put any money in the basket before he lets you take a candle. Right? So what did I do? I pushed the stand against the wall. I disrupted it. And I didn't know at the time that I was following innovation disruptive theory. And the first thing that happened was the gentleman who manned it, his name was Theodoros Makris. He was one of the 6 families I had. He came up to me and said, "Father, the Pangarion is pushed against the wall. Where am I supposed to stand?" And I said, "Ted, figure it out." So you know what he had to do? Instead of standing there like it was a transaction counter, he had to step out in front and start talking to people. And we changed it from a transaction to a welcome, right? So they're all over the place, these disruptors. And the pandemic, right? The pandemic is a major disruptor. So how many of us during the height of the pandemic were not worshiping in person? Did that happen? So what did you do? Zoom. Is that an innovation? You bet it is. We had at the height of the pandemic 1,200 Sunday worshipers. Now, I don't have 1,200 people in my pew, so where were they coming from? All over, right? We had, because of the pandemic, a group of people in our community who had moved to Ecuador. Okay? And in rural Ecuador, food security evaporated because the markets were daily and the government closed them. So the parishioners that live there are now joining us via Zoom. And one day in our Bible study, they say to me, "Father, we have a food security problem in Ecuador." So the parish responded by starting a food program. So every week we distribute 100 family meal kits in Ecuador. That's a disruption caused by the pandemic that led to an innovation. Right? Yes, Father. I forgot your first name. Samuel. Like my brother. Oh, let's get a mic for you, Father. Another disruption.
How do we initiate culture mindset change of people who do not see a need for a change?
How do we create a change in culture?
How do we initiate culture mindset change of people who do not see a need for a change?
So how do we initiate a change amongst people, culturally speaking, who do not see a need for it? Am I capturing your question? I would say we begin with urgency. Right? When Captain Winters, these parables I tell you are helpful because 6 years from now, as you're navigating this space, you're going to remember the story. You're not going to remember the theory. So Captain Winters is told, you're going to take that French village. You've got 20 men. Go. So he gets on that path, and as a leader, he knows his objective. right? So you're asking me the question, how do I instill in people who see no need for this transformation to occur? You as a leader know what the objective is. So my objective as a parish priest, I often tell people, is to get into heaven and take as many of you with me, right? So I know the objective. I'm going to take the village. So I get on the path, and I'm walking into the village, and what happens? People start shooting at you. As I said to you guys earlier, I told the fathers, resistance to change and sabotage is part of the reality, right? So people are going to start to resist you. They're going to try to sabotage your efforts. Remember the blind man, Gospel of John, chapter 9. Remember Jesus heals his sight, and the Pharisees say, "Who healed you?" And he says, "The man Jesus." They don't believe that this could have been done by Jesus, right? And then they ask him again, and he says, "The prophet." And then they ask the parents, and the parents say, "Don't ask us. We got nothing to do with it. He's of age. Ask him," right? So you're going to face these bullets, this machine gun. And what's everybody going to want to do? Jump into the ditch. Freeze up. But you as a leader have to remind them, if we stay here, this is the urgency. This is the compulsion, if you will. If we stay here, if we continue to do today what we're doing in 10 years, then like the Chancellor of the metropolis of San Francisco has noted, we will not have a metropolis. We will not have parishes. We have to get up or we'll die. Now, they may say to you, "Father, what are you talking about? There's plenty of Egyptians in Chicago," right? Well, you can point to the same thing with Greeks. There are more Greeks here than Egyptians? You bet your baklava there are. There's a ton of Greeks here. Are their parishes full? No, they're not. Not anymore. Right? So we raise the level of awareness and urgency, and then we get everybody moving again. And we tell them, look, there's going to be loss. Don't be naive and think that we're going to get from where we are to where we need to be and all of us will be standing. Right? Some of us will leave. You remember John 6? Jesus explains to them the Eucharist, and what happens in verse 66? I think it's very interesting that it's chapter 6, verse 66. Huh? Yeah. What he says, and it's too hard. And they no longer walk with him. Jesus lost people along the way. He didn't get everybody there. And sometimes we're so concerned with losing one person that we forget the majority, right? And we become people pleasers, not God pleasers. That's hard to hear, but it's true. We're so afraid of the conflict that we retreat and get in the ditch and get killed. Is this helping you? Okay. The other questions? Father Pavlos?
So your reverence, we're talking about the example of the children camp, and when they were offered only fun option, they didn't
died.
come, but they were offered only Christ.
They came.
They came.
Yeah.
This is not the case in many, like activities at church now. So unless we mix the spiritual part with the fun part, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So how we make it like Christ only and still be attractive, even though like people cannot see it that attractive.
Yeah. So the question is, okay, when you gave this example of the camp, we did away with the bouncy houses and the water balloon fights, and we made it about Jesus, and somehow we grew. And you feel like that's not the same in our reality. I have a lot to say here. Let me see if I can summarize it. We don't do bouncy houses very good. We're not very good at them, right? Does the world do bouncy houses better than us? Yeah, so why are we competing? You know what I mean? We're not as good at the balloon fighting and the shaving cream fights. As, there's a million camps that do this kind of thing, and they have more resources. But I think that's good that we're not very good at it, because it forces us to consider, what are we good at? And maybe we're not very good at presenting Christ anymore. But I think that's the only thing we're good at. I don't think we have any other skills. I really don't. You have no reason to join the church if you want to join it for any other reason than we have Jesus. Right? Now, did I lose people? Yes. I have people who have literally told me, I won't send my kid to your camp because it's all about Jesus and it's too religious. Thank you. I did my job. Too boring. Too spiritual. Right? But, okay, is that any different than when Christ walked the earth? Right? It's not any different, And I think that, again, we have to make a choice. What are we about? And I'm appealing to you as my brother and to you, my sisters and brothers, that we have to be about Christ first and last. What do you have on the altar? I saw it. Alpha, Omega. Beginning and the end. And I think, St. Mark, right? What would he say to us if he came to one of our youth events and saw us, doing some of the things we were doing? What would St. Mark say? He would say, focus on Christ. St. John Chrysostom said, if you have fewer numbers but greater quality, it's okay. Because a little leaven can leaven the whole lump. We either believe the gospel to be true or we don't. Right? And our fear, I think, Father Pavlos, my sweet brother, I hear it. I know it's a challenge because I have these conversations daily in my own brotherhood meetings. Father, if we do away with the basketball tournament, we won't have a youth program. So what are you talking about? I, as a parish priest, should be organizing a basketball tournament? Father, it's a tradition. We have, 1,500 people who come. And what happens at this basketball tournament? Huh? Anger, competition, alcohol, sex. Let's be honest. Not any of the things that we want to be part of as the church. We had a basketball tournament in Salt Lake City, the home of the Mormons. And some of the kids had brought marijuana. Some of the kids had brought alcohol. Other kids were throwing parties in the rooms and destroying property. The main desk attendant came to me as one of the priests, and he said, "Are you guys a Christian group?" And I said, "Yes." And he couldn't believe it. And we put a cross on it, and we say this is the Orthodox Church's youth event. And I don't want any more part of it. I just don't want to play the game anymore. I don't want to do it. I don't care. You can call me backwards or a traditionalist or a zealot, but I'm done. Now, I can talk like this with you, because this is the leaders. I can't necessarily speak so boldly in front of some of the laity. I have to season it with a little honey, right? I've got to coax them. But here, with you and me, what can we do, Father Pavlos? We have to change these cultures, And it's not going to happen overnight, right? 7 years, I said to you. It's a battle. It's an aircraft carrier, How long does it take to turn it in the ocean? A lot of open ocean, right? But I think it's the way to go. Who agrees with me? You agree? This is why I went to seminary, not to organize basketball tournaments, not to rent bouncy houses. I told the fathers that one of the big events in the Denver area used to be, they called it the trip to see the fall colors. And I thought naively when I came as a priest, what that meant was that they were going up into the mountains to see the aspens turn. No, they were going to the casinos. So the church was renting buses, 55 passenger buses, packing them full of, the retired parishioners and sending them up to gamble. And the priest was out there in the morning. As you, O Christ our God, traveled from Jerusalem to Emmaus, so now travel with these thy children. Illuminate their hearts with the wisdom of thy gospel, and return them to their peaceful pursuits. Holy water. Boom, gambling. What are we doing? Right? Does this sound, you guys have anything like this? Not yet. It's coming. Right? I used to say, at least people used to pretend they weren't living together. Right? Now they openly flaunt it. Right? They used to have the decency to hide it from the priest. But we have to change the reason why they come to church. And then they'll change their behaviors. Right? We have to change the relationship they have with Jesus. Other questions? I feel your pain though, Father Pavlos. I feel your pain. Yeah. Yeah, I think we should continue that, even if it is a minority.
How about the majority? What do we do with the majority?
We allow them to exercise their freedom. Is there a compulsion? Let me say it this way. Let us pretend for a moment that we will do anything to keep our churches full. What does that sound like? Anything to keep our churches full. What does that sound like?
Wrong identity.
Wrong identity. Sounds like a compromise of the gospel, right? And so when we think about whether or not we're making disciples, can we with character and integrity say we are? If we're holding them together out of a false pretense, present the gospel and let them make a choice. At least they know this is the church. This is what the church is about. And then they can exercise their freedom. I remember when I was a young boy, none of the services were in English. Everything was in liturgical Greek. So no one understands liturgical Greek today, unless you're a monastic on Mount Athos and have spent 20 years studying, ancient Greek. So my father, when we turned 13, was part of a technical change. Fathers know what that means now. The church that I was attending started a mission that did everything in English. When my father heard the words of the liturgy, he said to me as a boy on the way home, I didn't know that was what we believed. He didn't know. And so my mother said to him, what do you want to do? Should we keep going or not? And my dad said, I'm interested. Now, he wasn't what you would call a churchgoer, but he was finally given the choice, right, to decide for himself, this is what the faith is about, Jesus. He grew up as a nice Greek boy. You marry a Greek girl, and she'll make you avlameno soup, and you'll be happy. And that's why he went to church, to check out the Greek girls, meet one, and marry them. And then in his 40s, he finds out that the church is about Jesus. Well, it's the truth. And then he had to decide, do I want to be here? Now, I can say of the generation that I grew up with, several of them, when they heard it was about Jesus, decided that they didn't want to come anymore. I have to repent. I have to change. I have to fast. I have to pray. I have to give alms. I'm going to the country club. I'm going to watch football. That's okay. They can make that choice, right? Are you okay with that? Well, we're not okay with it, but what I'm saying is, are we okay that people can exercise their freedom? They're not here because they have to be, right? And they're not here because of momentum. That's what a lot of it is. Cultural momentum, you know? So when I was in the big old parish, I'd get people that call me and say, Father, can you do a baptism for me? And I'd say, why? They'd say, I don't know. My grandmother told me I had to do it. Right? Do you get that? My parents want me to do it, Father. That's not reason enough. Do you mean you're not going to baptize my child? I didn't say that. But I said the reason to baptize your child because your parents told you to do it is not enough. You willing to have that tough conversation? Or we just move them along to get along? We tend to just move them along to get along, right?
Even on the marriages.
Yeah, even on the marriages. Oh, you're living together, no problem. Yeah, keep it moving. I got a wedding at 3. There's another one at 4. Right? We don't confront them with the gospel. Right? But we need to. Am I being a jerk? No, you know, because I'm forcing you to think about it this way. I mean, I'm going to get on a flight tomorrow, so in a sense, I don't have to worry about what I say.
Find someone to take it, yeah.
Huh? Yeah, if I can find. The fathers know. I gave this presentation to a very large gathering in Pittsburgh, and they were so ticked off at me that I couldn't get a ride to the airport. So I had to call myself a cab. So, you know.
You have the Uber app.
I have the Uber app now. Yeah, this was before Uber. So I'm used to a poor reception. You know, it's really the reality that we see even in the ministry of Christ. You know, think of Israel. What was Israel's sole purpose? To meet the Messiah. That was it. And then when he showed up, most of them rejected him. Right? That's the reality. And then we think we're going to have it any different. It's the same story playing itself out again. You know, so we have to bring the message to those who are wanting to hear it. You know, I'm not.
Father, you don't think that any other means to bring the people just to introduce Christ with some activity, some sport, you disagree?
No, I'm not saying that. Thank you, Father. That's a corrective. I mean, I'm not saying there's nothing else that the church should do. You know, we have, you know, a fall festival for the children, and they come, and you know, we have a summer vacation church camp, you know, and they play tag and, you know, games in our playground setting, right? We do those things, but they're periphery. They're not the main thing, right? The main thing is Christ. And whenever something encounters the main thing and is contrary to it, we prune it. It's back to the question you asked. You know, when we see people drifting away, it's because we've no longer presented the main thing, right? And I think as a priest, you've got to be very careful to guard your role. What are you in the parish? Remember with the apostles when they started getting too busy serving tables in the book of Acts, what did they say? Let's get some deacons. They can handle that. We will devote ourselves to prayer, the ministry of the word, right? And if that's not our main purpose in the parish, and we are instead doing these periphery things, these non-specifics, then that's where the problem lies. And what I'm seeing is that in most of our unhealthy parishes, the periphery is the main thing. Would we agree? Yeah. There are other questions? I know we're...
And I can speak up too if it's easier.
Streaming.
Oh, for the stream, we'll put you on the mic.
All right, so again, thank you so much for just talking to us and enlightening us with everything that we went over. My big question that kind of popped into my head was this idea, especially with the Orthodox community, you have all these ethno churches and these ethno religions, right? Where it's like Coptic is Egyptian, and you got the Greeks and you got the Russians. But yet, we were talking about diversity and being like, you're joking around like, hey, if a blonde guy with like blue eyes came in, like how weird would that be, right? But how can we put those, I guess, ethnic like barriers of entry aside to that main focus that is Christ.
Yeah. How do we do that? Well, in a sense, that's the whole purpose of this series of talks with the fathers. We begin by reclaiming our identity. And that identity is our focus on Christ, the commitment to that changing our lives, and the formation of a spiritual community that lives, day to day in an excellent way, right? That's the 4 pillars of Parish Health. We then look at the obstacles that are in front of us, and I listed 4, the unbalanced identity, the stagnation, the autocracy, right? The underdevelopment. And we eliminate those barriers. And then we go about developing our leadership and culture in such a way that it leads the learning for the faithful. Now that's in a very 20,000 foot, 30,000 foot view of what we do. But one of the images that I shared with the fathers was when we think about our communities and how they are not diverse. They're neither diverse ethnically, socioeconomically, they're not even diverse politically. We tend to be kind of monochromatic. Is that fair? And that's a weakness, right? We know biologically speaking that if we don't create diversity, then we're susceptible to disease, right? When there's a mixing of the gene pool, we don't end up with big funny ears and crooked noses, right? We know that in a lot of the royal bloodlines, even the pharaohs, what happened? They inbred, and it led to a weakening of their genetic material, right? So our communities are like these upside down funnels, where we sort of exclude and pre-qualify who can join. And they're not like a funnel in its right position that represents the parable of the dragnet. Do you remember that parable? Where a net is cast into the sea and all types of fish are brought into shore and the sorting is left to God. So I think we have to socialize these concepts. When we're talking about this right now, we have to socialize this with our own leadership, and then we take that idea and we start to socialize it in our communities. And then we start to work towards the adoption of that parish health matrix and the reduction of the obstacles. And then what naturally happens is people start to show up. I was telling the fathers this. One of my most recent members, Tobias, if he walked in here right now, I guarantee you'd be a little like, I don't know. He's tattooed from here to here. He's got dreadlocks down to here. Right? He's pierced, smells a little funny because he smokes. Would he be welcome? I know in the parish I grew up in, he would not have been welcomed. He'd have been turned away at the door, right? But once we really adopt this healthy lifestyle as a parish, then someone like that is welcomed. And you know what? For anybody who thinks that someone like Tobias shouldn't be in our churches, they don't know who St. Mary of Egypt is. Does St. Mary of Egypt in the Coptic tradition get her own Sunday during Lent? Huh? What's wrong with you guys? Yeah, she's there. I saw her when I came in. In the Byzantine rite, St. Mary of Egypt is the theme for the last Sunday of Lent. She's the sole focus, right? Her story is so important. Someone who we'd never think should be in the church. Right? Is so lauded by the church. Father Zosimas goes, she levitates when she receives communion and then reposes in peace and becomes incorrupt, right? It's amazing to think of that story. Well, our communities no longer like that story of the life-saving station are wanting to bring in, those that don't look like us. So what I'm saying to you, and what's your first name? Sarah. What I'm saying to you is that I think the whole process leads naturally to a diversity. Ideological, socioeconomic, political, all the rest. And that diversity makes us strong. And the community that's gone through this process is accepting of that diversity. When I first started at St. Spiritlands and we started to get a few visitors, my parish council president said, I wanted to grow, Father, but not with these kinds of people. Right? And, what if your parents are from Egypt? So if you brought home a non-Egyptian boy, yeah, forget it. I know what that's like. I stepped off the plane to Seattle to meet my then girlfriend's parents, and the first question was, Milas, which in Greek means, do you speak? And I was like, I do, but that's a trick question in Greek. Because if you say malista, that means we're going Greek. That's it. So I said, menza. So. She turned on her heels and walked away. That was it. Interview over, right? But what about bringing someone who's not Egyptian home is wrong? Nothing. Is your brother here? Your mom and dad here? They might be watching. And we have that same reality in the church. We think it's good enough for us, but it's not good enough for the non-Egyptians. Let's keep them out. Right? It's sinful. Do you want me to classify it a different way? Yes, Father Theodore.
Just two questions that came in. One came online is, how do you balance, or if you can speak to the balance between the needs of converts or newcomers,
with the balance of the needs,
and the immigrants that are still coming in our case.
Okay.
You can speak to that. And the second question is,
can we do the first one and then let's get to the second? Right. So I think first the balance is simple. Jesus. Does the immigrant need something else?
Oh, you want a list?
No, I know. Look, I know what that's like because I grew up in a community that did not speak English. The only thing my Theotula could say was hungry. That was the only English word she had. I know. But don't get pulled into the specific. What do the Egyptian immigrants need?
Want the church to be their cultural oasis in the midst of this.
Right, it's the same thing the Greeks did. Look at the life-saving station.
Yeah.
But they're not stupid. And they're not simple. They know if we speak to them, if we explain to them, doesn't mean that we're going to get everybody. But you're telling me that the faithful from Egypt are willing to abandon Christ? No. So if we tell them, think for a minute about what the need that you have is and what the church can truly provide you. Now, of course, we know what St. James also says. We can't simply say to them, be warm and filled, and if they need daily bread or clothing, we ignore it. But the balance between what the converts need and what the native Orthodox need is the same thing. We just lost sight of that. Right? That's the same thing that Paul faces when he's dealing with that tension between Jews and Gentiles. And Peter slips into thinking, well, maybe they need to be Jewish. Right? And Paul confronts him and says, you're not walking uprightly in the gospel. Can you imagine saying that to Peter? Think of it. Peter, sorry, buddy, you're not walking uprightly in the gospel. What's Peter going to say? He repents. He says, you know what, you're right. So when we think about this, it's a false dichotomy. As if these people need one thing and these people need another thing, right? All people need the same thing, right? They need Jesus. They don't need something else. That's how I would answer that question. The second one?
Second one is sort of picking up what you were saying, Sarah, earlier. Okay, you get the non-Egyptian guy home or the Egyptian girl home. It might, I'm going to be, to be very blunt, if I'm going to be charitable and say that the issue might not be the ethnic or whatever, but they're not Orthodox.
Yeah.
And then they're just getting married.
To become?
Just because you have to join the church to get married. And that brings a whole different set of problems.
Sure.
And then you're marrying into the church for what reason? And I think that's another aspect that.
So the question is, okay, someone meets the nice Egyptian girl, Sarah. And his name is Larry or Bubba. And he decides, I like Sarah so much, I'm going to become Orthodox just so I can marry her. Right? Sarah, it's okay. Larry's a nice guy. Are we opportunistic? It's an opportunity, isn't it? I mean, it's going to happen. You know, we can't restrict it anyway. You know, I think it's something like 52% of the marriages within the Greek archdiocese are between a Greek Orthodox and a non-Greek Orthodox. Are you getting there? So it's moot. That's going to happen. And trust me, most of the time it's not because Larry goes, oh, I love Orthodoxy, and then, Sarah, I like you too. Right? It's usually, I like Sarah, and then they say, I got to do what? Okay, I'll do that too. Right? I mean, they usually will, you know. So if we have the center of our faith on Christ and the transformation, then when those people, I can point to almost all the couples in my community, that is exactly the reality. And our retention rate on those people is like over 90%. Because we present to them the option of the gospel. Right? And who's to say that God's hand isn't in that? If he's over all things, maybe he decided, this is the way I'm going to get Larry. We say marriage is for salvation, don't we? So, you'll like Larry.
But how about if Larry takes her out?
How about if Larry takes her out? Well, again, this is the opportunity that we have in front of us. You know, again, we're not going to stop nice Egyptian girls from marrying non-Egyptian guys, or nice Egyptian boys from marrying non-Egyptian girls. You're not going to stop it. You can't, right? So, how are we, this is a disruptive factor, Mina. It's a disruptive factor. So it should lead to innovation. How are we innovating? They're out the door? You know, there's been a lot of good work, at least in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, in this very area. So there's programs like 8 Dates, you know, where there's this online program. There's a lot of pre-Cana stuff. I meet with any couple that wants to get married in my parish. They have to have a minimum of 12 sessions with me plus a marriage retreat. Okay? They have to be in attendance in liturgy before I'm going to do the sacrament of marriage. Okay? It's a pretty high bar. But, you know, if you don't encourage people to become the best version of themselves, they won't. You know, we're always ministering to the lowest level. Why not shoot for the sky? You know what I mean? So I think there's opportunities there. And you know what? I don't know about you, but I think Orthodoxy is the greatest thing ever. So why wouldn't I be excited about this opportunity to share what Orthodoxy is with people who've been introduced to it because of a boy or a girl? Who cares? I don't care how they got here. Right? They're here. You know? The hardest thing to do is get them in the door. Right? Once they're in, don't let them out. You're welcome. Any last questions? I don't know what time it is. We're probably way late. 9:20. Well, thank you. Thank you, Father James and Father Jacob, for organizing and inviting me. Thank you, Fathers, again. Your reverences. Is that the correct way to say it? Thank you, faithful, and those who join us online for this opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Man, hallelujah, glory be to the Father. Ioke agiob nevma keninka ike sonsion astonio. Tino shivolingo emagio penchoi sisas becheresas is monir in tedve nimnemo emiviaro nimni siti nimne semare peknain. Tempekle os sotiamo.